In this episode, Harrison and I talk about the positives and negatives of self-help.
And surprise, we're in person. I'm Harrison.
And I'm Ameer, and we believe that one of life's most valuable assets is the gift of conversation.
In the midst of life, sometimes we forget the true power of a deep, meaningful conversation.
So take a breath, come join us,
and let's talk about life.
Self-help, good or bad?
I mean, that's you can't just start with that. Overall, I would say it's good, but there are definitely a lot of self-help itself is good. Are you talking in like self-help on the internet? Because that there are bad parts too. I definitely think it overall it's been good experience for me. I think there are bad parts to it, which we should get into. Let's start with the positives. I think like having it be accessible. It's like its own genre and like industry now, which that didn't exist. You know, I don't know how many years ago, or it was less available to people, right? So now that it's like it's on the internet, there's books, it's a popular thing, you know what I mean? There's kind of almost like self-help celebrities. I work for one of them. It's like, right? Like that kind of stuff I think is great because it's accessible. It's like you have to know that something's there to be able to make a change or whatever. So it's out there. People know it's out there. It's also got a little bit of like bad reputation in the sense that like it seems like an entitled kind of thing, privileged thing to do, which I guess in a way it is. And people can focus on that. But for me, it's been great, and it's so nice that there is that like kind of community and this genre of self-help, because like I'm interested in that stuff, you're interested in that stuff, we're talking about it, you know. So having it be available and accessible has been really great, and I think that's awesome. But there are a lot of negative things that come to mind when I think of the self-help industry specifically, if you want to call it that, which is like, well, we were talking about this the other day, like, or last night, the experts that you get in some of this stuff. It's like, I feel sometimes it's approached too extremely, and it's like, you need to do this, and if you're not doing this, you're a terrible person and whatever. And it's like, I've heard from some of these people that they're not doing what they're saying. So I'm like, well, who are you to sit here and tell me this is what you need to do? And then I feel bad about it. I'm like, well, he's doing it and he's saying that this works. I need to do it. And then if I don't do it, like I feel terrible, but it's like they're not practicing it on a daily basis. So that's my problem with it, which we can dive into. How about you? I'm sure you're in the same boat.
Totally. I think it's such an interesting word, self-help industry. The fact that there's all this money tied into it. There's all these businesses surrounding it, you know, like all this self-help content. I think first, just to give all the viewers and listeners some context, if you can't tell by now on the podcast, Harrison and I are both very much into personal development, personal growth, all of those, you know, lovely fun things. And it's definitely what's helped us become who we are as people. But obviously there are, you know, there's some downsides to everything. And the first downside that I personally think of when it comes to self-help is how, in some cases, and I don't want to turn this into a straw man argument, but in some cases that I've seen, it can be very predatory.
That's a good way to put it.
Right?
Elaborate though. What do you mean by predatory?
Yeah, like let's say you have someone who's in a very vulnerable position, you know, who, you know, is in a vulnerable life situation. Let's just leave it at that. They seek out this self-help thinking that it's going to be the solution to all of their problems. And so they throw money at courses, at seminars, at books and everything. But in many ways, they're like, self-help is great, but it won't solve everything. Right? Like you need to, you know, do the work yourself. Right. And in many ways, I feel like it can become almost like the negative aspects of a religious practice. Well, not necessarily religious practice, but organized religion as an institution.
Right.
You know?
Like blindly following stuff.
Exactly.
Right.
And so I think then when you incorporate that, you know, almost like, you know, predatory aspect with the fact that there's this self-help industry, right? Like
now there's money involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where it gets a little iffy for me. I think also to what you said, there can be a little bit of entitlement.
Yeah,
in the sense, like, let's be real, between the two of us, like, we're human. We probably have had moments where we think, oh, this person doesn't think like this, or this person's mindset is this way.
Right.
Like there's a little bit of judgment, right, that can come across sometimes if we're not careful, right? And I think that's also just something to watch out for as well. I'm not saying that it's a direct result of self-help. I think it's more so just a result of, ego.
Yeah,
Just
for sure.
how humans, kind of operate very messily. But I think overall, self-help and kind of the widespread dissemination of it is overall a net positive thing.
Yes, yeah, definitely overall. I would also say the same thing. Like it's positively impacted my life. I think a lot of people, I think it's generally a good thing, but there's flaws to it, obviously, like everything, right? There's flaws to everything. And what's been the most impactful thing for you of all of this, like of having it be accessible? You know what I mean? Like what's come out of, and also through that, you should like, what is self-help? Like, what does that mean?
Totally.
For you, because it's very broad, right? Like, 'cause for me, I think of health stuff, like eating and that kind of thing. I would put that in that category. But there's also, atomic habits and all those kinds of things, right? So, like, productivity is a whole different. So, what is it for you, and how has it impacted you?
For me, I think it's anything that directly is about becoming a better person.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Anything that directly helps you become a better person. So in the sense of like working on mindset, or working on your habits, or working on your health, I would, I can put that also in there. I'd say for me, it's more so on the periphery, but there can be a connection there.
Okay.
And this is kind of like a meeting point, or like, the Venn diagram. And for me, it represents books, speakers, seminars, conferences, keynotes, social media content, which we'll get to in a little bit.
True. Oh my God.
I mean, it's funny. Even this podcast in some ways could be.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I mean, here's an interesting thing, right? So as a little anecdote, I started this with the intent of it being that, like, this was in the self-improvement category, like when I was trying to put it into something. And because I was trying to replicate, as you do when you start out something, what I've seen, and I felt very much a lot of these things we're talking about, like trying to be a certain way so I fit into the quote unquote industry and did it the right way. And I'm like, it was coming from a less authentic place than it does right now. And I think that's something maybe to touch on too. What are your thoughts on like authenticity with this, right? Because that's part of it.
Totally. Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Just to be like very vulnerable and open, I think when I first started kind of like my foray into this world of self-help, if I'm being honest, lots of it was motivated by a good degree of like self-hatred kind of thing.
What do you mean?
Like in the sense that, I wanted to grow because I hated the way that I was. I hated that I didn't feel confident. I hated that I felt this way, or I thought this way. And kind of like part of my initial foray into self-help was this hunger to better myself because I didn't feel good enough.
Outgrow your past self, right?
Yeah, because I didn't feel good enough. And so I was like, let me read every single book. Let me watch every single talk. Maybe then, if I follow everything that these people say, kind of like a, like a religion, if I follow it religiously, maybe I'll be good enough to go into self-help heaven. But, obviously I've outgrown that phase. But I think, to your question about authenticity, I think self-help is about improving yourself within the context of, actually, no, I think self-help is about improving yourself, not necessarily becoming someone else. It's not about becoming the person that you're reading. It's not about becoming, Dr. So-and-so. It's not about becoming Mr. Tony so-and-so, right. Not gonna name drop here, but you'll know, right? But it's more so about becoming that best version of yourself. And what does that, and becoming the best version of yourself authentically, it's going to look different from other people.
Yes.
Like you could read Atomic Habits and get totally, different things and become totally different. And I could read it and get something else. And I think that's the beauty of it. But when we get too caught up on the prescriptions, like, oh, do you do it this way? Oh, no, you're not.
Well, it's like when we talk about the routines, right? Yeah. You have to customize it.
Exactly. What do you think, though, about like authenticity and how that like is self-help authentic?
There's a lot of these. There are people that are in this kind of category that I would say seem inauthentic to me. Then there, on the other hand, there are a lot of people that seem very authentic to me, and that could be personal, like bias or whatever. I don't know what it. But I think I don't know if there's like an answer of is it generally authentic or not. But I think it's important to think about that when you're selecting things that you're putting into your brain and your mind, because the best self-help, self-improvement, personal development information that has impacted me has been from people who are not prescribing something like you're saying. It's like, here is what I did. How can you put this into your life? It's going to look different for you. It's going to look different for you. It's going to look different for the listener. You know what I mean? And that's been the most impactful, because it takes away the pressure and the stress of not doing it right, because there's no right way to do it. And I guess, so authenticity makes me think of like the person who is sharing that, right? Because it's humans at the end of the day that are sharing these things, right? And if they're authentic and they're like, this worked for me, and I struggle with this and whatever now, and I'm still struggling with these things and that kind of stuff. When they make themselves human too, and the relatable, that makes it more. You keep using the word accessible, but I just feel like it fits so well. Like, it does feel like, okay, I could do that. I'm not going to be exactly like Ameer just because he told me this, but I know that, I can implement it into my life this way. And I think it's important to go into it with that kind of awareness, and like kind of vet things to make sure, like, and even if they're maybe not, like, question things. We were talking about questioning last night. Like, it's important. That's really one of the most important things, I think, is like to question what the people are saying. Why are they saying it? What's been their experience? How's it going to affect your life? Don't just blindly follow things, right? Yeah.
You bring up a very good point. So often these self-help talking heads can come across as very inauthentic. Like, there's no way that you meditated for 5 hours this morning and then like went out to go run in the rain while there was a storm, and then go do your like priming, whatever, hop into a cold, like is that feasible for most humans, right? And so I think you're totally right. Like, coming at it from an authentic place, like, I think the people who have impacted me the most in the self-help world are the people who openly share their flaws, openly share their humanities. And I said I wasn't going to name drop, but I think a perfect example of this is Mel Robbins. Have you like
not much, but I know of
love that woman. She's like the Jennifer Lawrence of self-help. For real, she's so relatable. She like talks about, oh yeah, I know about I literally had to use this in order to get up out of bed because I didn't feel like getting up out of bed this morning. She shares like her humanity, and I think for her, that's why there's so much appeal, right? She feels human as opposed to this perfect image of self-help.
That's where this elitist thing comes in, right? Because it's like, almost sometimes, I mean, it's like this with anything, right? You could start out with a good intention, but as you start to gain more popularity or whatever, different things go to your mind, your ego is involved, whatever, right? So the people that are most likable, people love Jennifer Lawrence because she's just a person. And we listen to Emma Chamberlain's podcast. I don't know if you listen to her. Like, she's just a kid, and she talks about being a kid, essentially. I don't know, she's like 20 now. And that's what makes it likable, because like, she's just a person, you know what I mean? Yeah, a lot of people know who she is. Maybe she's a celebrity, but not treating yourself differently. Like, they're not treating themselves differently. And when they share things like that, it's like, oh yeah, this morning, like, I was struggling to get out of bed and I feel this way, but this is what I did to help. Maybe it'll help you. Because it's not like, oh, these people are perfect. You read a book and you go, there's one. So I read a book. It was incredible. But it was very aggressive in the sense that, like, this is what I did and it works and you have to do it. And I got a lot of great nuggets out of it. And I kind of had to strip away that part. And I don't think it was intended to be that way. He's just pretty like aggressive dude, like, but it does make me feel that sense of pressure, and that, like, well, he did it and he had no happiness, like he didn't enjoy life, you know what I mean? And it worked out, but I'm like, it's just somebody used the word, now I can't remember, there's a phrase, I was listening to something, it was on that Colin and Samir show, and they were talking about how people are, the words were so great, but it was essentially like, just being nicer to themselves when they're doing things. So like exercising, it's like it doesn't have to be an extreme exercise, go workout. I can go for a walk, that counts. Things like that, right? That is so much more exciting to me because it doesn't feel like an extra thing I have to add on my to-do list. So it comes into the self-help thing, right? Where it's like it's a productivity hack or whatever, but it doesn't like it's not you have to follow this list and it has to be these guidelines.
The commandments.
Exactly. If you don't do this, it's not gonna work. And it's like, well, that doesn't make me want to do it or feel good about it, right? So that being an authentic human is so much more kind and like it feels more exciting. You know what I mean? Yeah.
An interesting part about this, like, to be like, I know for a fact, like, there's definitely the like a corniness to the self-help world sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
What do you think about that? You know, like,
do you have any examples you want to bring up?
I don't want to name drop anyone, but you know what I mean. I'm sure viewers you can imagine as well, like, you know, the really cheesy ads or the cheesy books with the.
I think that's why it gets a bad reputation too, right? I mean, because like some of those things, I don't know. Like I haven't had too much experience. I've kind of curated what I'm consuming at this point. That I'm not really like aware of some of those things, and I think I've personally gone through enough to know like, okay, well, like I'm not gonna pay attention to that. Like, you know what I mean? I think motive is an important thing. We're talking about all this, where it's like if you're getting an Instagram reel or a TikTok and it's like clearly somebody promoting a course or something, it's like, well, their intent is to make money off of this, which I know a lot of it is, but it's like deep down, are they trying to help you? Or are they just trying to get money? There's like that kind of thing, and that's where the corniness come in. Just for anything, where it's like people are just trying to follow a formula to get a certain, you know, they have different motives, right? What are your thoughts on it? You brought up the question.
That reminds me of a Naval quote. Here we go, encyclopedia mode. Let's go. But it reminds me of a Naval quote. Basically, if you don't know who Naval Ravikant is, highly recommend. Please check him out. He is fantastic.
We've only mentioned him 8 million times.
8 million times, I know, but he is like the basis for so many of the anecdotes and analogies and quotes that I bring up. But he mentioned this one thing when it comes to like the content and the podcast and everything that he puts out, especially regarding like wealth creation, because, you know, he's like an investor and stuff.
Right.
He's gone on record saying that he will never charge money for that, because if he did, then he would become just another huckster trying to get rich off of you.
Right.
Right. It's like, listen to me talk about how to make money. Pay me to hear me tell you how to make money.
Yeah.
And then like you go into the course, it's like you need to make a course telling people how to make money, that kind of thing. But I think it's important to curate who you listen to. And going a step back, I think with the corniness of it, I've definitely read my fair share of really corny self-help books. To be honest, if I'm being honest, I kind of have a soft spot in my heart for them. You know, it's like, oh, that's so corny. I'm going to do it, though. I can do this. I am capable. Like that kind of stuff. And I know for a fact that can turn off a lot of people at first glance, like, oh, it's so corny. And I might be totally wrong, but I feel like when it comes to almost like the general public's view of self-help, I feel like there's also kind of a form of pride in the sense of there's nothing wrong with me. I don't need to change. Oh, you read that corny book. Oh, you read self-help books. Oh, right. You need help. Yeah. Like there's kind of like, as you mentioned, this kind of elitism, this kind of pride, in having almost, well, I don't want to pass judgments or anything, but I think it's different for, it's different for everyone, and everyone has different tastes. But I think people can sometimes be very condescending from the outside looking in.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And I'm sure there's people who are probably like, have listened to our podcast or watched it and be like, what the hell do you guys know?
Yeah.
Y'all are like 21, you know? Or 20,
I'm 22.
Yeah, okay. Like y'all are in your early 20s. Like, what do you know about life? Right? And I think that pride, in a way, and that ego, as we keep on bringing up, can really stop a lot of people from getting the most out of it. So I think ego on both sides, whether it's from the outside looking in or from the inside looking out, is just detrimental just to us as people as a whole, what was your question again?
I don't know.
I went
it's
on
okay.
a totally different tangent.
But you said something interesting, because like I try to come at it and I think everybody should. I think this is a good way to go about it. Is like just be curious, be explorative, and that's why we're doing this. Like, and we've said that many times. Like, it's not like we're saying let's talk about life because we have all the answers. It's like let's talk about it because we're trying to figure it out, and we're just sharing us trying to
bring you in, right?
So, I think that's like an important thing to important. That's not the word. Important. Is to be curious, like kind of all of this what I'm saying, and like reflecting on when you're consuming things and whatever. It's like approaching it from that way of being like I'm exploring this and trying to understand it. You're trying to understand yourself, right? Essentially through these extra things, but it's not like blindly following somebody or whatever. It really is like it's a explorative process trying to. I mean, I think that's what it is at its core. Like, the more we think or talk about it, like self-help or personal development or whatever, it's like learning about yourself. The more you learn about yourself, you grow, and you're hopefully moving in a positive direction. And it's not that you have to just follow these 10 steps and you'll be, the perfect person or whatever. It's just using all these different tools. Exactly what I said with the routines. It's like you're shopping for different things. You're finding what works for you, and how it impacts you. And maybe you tried something and it was terrible and you did not like it. And I think that's really what it is, and it has been for me at least. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, totally agree. It's just shopping for what works for you. Like every book, like I kind of have things that I take from it and things that I disregard. And I think it's important to be able to view things with a filter because it shows that you're thinking critically. One interesting thing that I've noticed lately, especially on YouTube or just social media in general, is kind of this anti-self-help trend that's coming up. Like I've personally seen a lot of videos titled "The Toxic World of Self-Help." Self-help is brainwashing you. I was brainwashed by self-help. All that kind of stuff. When you first hear that, have you seen that kind of stuff? What do you think of it?
Matt Diavella or somebody have a video? Nathaniel Drew. One of them. I haven't watched it, but I've been wanting to. Have you watched it?
Yeah, I don't remember too much from it to talk on.
Okay. I mean, it's doing what they don't like. The parts that they don't like about self-help, they're just doing it, but about a different topic. You know what I mean? Like, they don't like that, it's like, I'm assuming, it brainwashed me. It's like, it's forcing me to do this thing or whatever, but you're literally making a video.
You have the choice.
Yeah, but you're making a video saying that people shouldn't do it. And it's the same thing, but just in a different way. I haven't watched enough of those or checked them out, but it makes me think that that kind of curious process I'm talking about that's not the way they went about it, maybe, or that they weren't thinking for themselves maybe enough. Because I don't know, I feel like I need to watch one of those videos to see. I mean, you've obviously seen them. What do you think? I don't know if I'm even qualified to share.
I'm gonna have to watch one of them. Pull one up to watch it quickly. Oh, is this gonna be a reaction podcast?
No.
Okay. Just trying to dig through my memory.
What do you think when you just see that though, too? Like when you see that kind of title and whatever.
I think it's the straw man argument. I think they're kind of putting all the things that they don't like about the self-help industry and saying that is everything. All self-help. It's kind of a sweeping generalization. But once again, like people can think critically. People can choose for themselves what they want to follow.
Exactly.
I don't think I think it's a very small percentage of people on the planet who actually blindly follow everything that a book says. Right. Even I struggle to follow everything that a book says sometimes. I'm like, oh, what? Oh, I'm supposed to do that? Okay, I'll get to that eventually, And, I think it's a straw man argument. I think people like to paint self-help as this big bad thing, but it's really just the bad aspects that you don't like. You can just critically separate them.
Right, exactly.
And the funny part is with these titles, self-help is brainwashing you. Am I brainwashed? Are we brainwashed?
Yeah, I don't think so.
I don't think so. Maria, are we brainwashed?
No comment.
No comment. Oh shoot. Okay, we're gonna have to check. Okay. But I would like to say that we're not, like, we can think for ourselves. Like, I disagree with a lot of stuff that's said, and I think it's important to understand that the vast majority of people are smart enough to know what works for them and what doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's unfair to put that label as a sweeping generalization saying all self-help is bad. Even though it's positively impacted so many people's lives. Like I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wasn't for the self-help industry. You know, as much of a bad rap as that word can get, I wouldn't be who I am today without that.
So what would you say to someone who is maybe a little skeptical about this industry, self-help stuff? Maybe they've heard about friends, family doing it and they're not super interested, but a little curious, so I want to check it out. What would be a recommendation for someone like trying to get into it in like and easing into it? You know what I mean? Like where to start?
I would say two things. One, genuine curiosity. You know, like just approach it with curiosity. Be like, that's interesting. Kind of just, you know, opening one's mind. That's straightforward enough. And the second thing I would say that personally helped me, find someone that you can relate to. Find someone that looks like you, that's from a same cultural background as you, that talks like you, from the same place. Because I know often for, you know, I'm just speaking from my own experience, for many like, you know, friends of color that I speak to, they often feel kind of separate from it because lots of the self-help figures are typically white or people that they can't relate to, you know. And so I think it's important to find someone from a cultural paradigm that matches yours. So for example,
Let's say any recommendations for
any
like
recommendations
for you?
For me, it's not like I've mentioned him 8-9 million times, but I personally really like Naval just because I relate to some degree, you know. Immigrant, you know, like immigrant kid moving to North America, all that kind of stuff. I relate to that. That's just for myself personally. Like I don't know what cultural background like everyone might be from. So I think just do your fair share of research. You know, I don't have any specific recommendations, and I don't want to give specific recommendations either, because that can get a little too prescriptive. And as we were talking about last night, I don't want people to get too hung up on the prescriptions. Oh, you have to listen to this or you have to do this. You know,
it's definitely a good way to go about it, though. Like you said, like finding someone that you relate to. I think that's why we kind of like veer towards certain people and feel it more, you know, pulled towards certain directions because we see ourselves maybe in those people, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's an important thing to go. Yeah.
What about for you? For someone who's skeptical?
Yeah. I don't know. I would try to reframe, almost like try to get rid of your preconceived ideas about it. It's like anything. It's like you need to, like you said, explore it and be curious and discover what it actually is for you. Maybe it is what you think it is, but you've got to go into it like trying to discover that, and be open-minded to whatever comes out of it. It could be positive, it could be negative, whatever it is, but just be open-minded. And I think that's a big thing, is just having that, being open-minded, but still being critical.
Yeah.
So not just like accepting everything, but being like, oh, this could be a totally different thing I never would have thought of, but it's great because I'm not gonna open that book because I don't agree with the title or whatever. It's like, it doesn't mean that there's not good things inside of that, and that you don't have to agree with everything, but you can take pieces out of it, right? So I would just say, yeah, being open-minded definitely would be the big.
Yeah, totally. And I would also say, when it comes to finding something that's in a cultural paradigm that's similar to yours, finding something that's modern, you know, because so many of the like older self-help books can be so archaic in their language. Right. It's so hard to relate to them. I have tried to reach Think and Grow Rich like 5 times, but I can't make it through because the language is just so inaccessible. You know, it just feels so opaque. You know, it's like I can't relate to these people at all, kind of thing. And so, you know, find something modern, some great authors. Oh, this is a book. If I were to give a book recommendation, this is one that I actually really, really like, and I think it's also super accessible. The Happiness Equation by Neil Pasricha. Fantastic book. Love it. It's such a fun read. It's like easy to go through. There's pictures, diagrams. It's funny. It's modern. There's kind of levity to it. And it just talks about like science and like science-backed and studied ways to be happier. And it covers like, I feel like if I were to choose one book to read, Like if I could only read one book in my life, ooh, actually, well, that's a hard one.
Yeah, let's
But
not.
okay, if I were to cut out my personal favorite book of all time, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, for the vast majority of people, if I were to choose like one book that every person on earth could read, The Happiness Equation, you know?
Yeah.
Because I think ultimately, if we could all just like, you know, within the confines of our own like socioeconomic situation,
Yes,
everything,
yeah.
that's an important thing that we'll talk about as well. I think, you know, it would just benefit the world if we were all happier.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's an interesting thing to think about and talk about, like this. I don't know if it's talked about like enough, because there's a lot of like either you're in it or you're out of it, kind of like the self-help thing, right? But it's like, what's wrong with it? Like there's definitely things wrong with it. There's good parts of it, which we've touched on. I don't even know if we need to get into it. Like social media is a whole different ball game, period. But especially with this kind of stuff, because like we said, like very quickly, I was sharing with Ameer last night, like making, you know, TikToks, I know they're longer now, and Reels you probably can make longer, but like generally people are aiming for like under a minute, right? It's like you can only put so much genuine like and thorough information in 60 seconds, even if you're being really like good about it. But then it's like, okay, you're trying to give it a hook, and we got to have this and we got to have that, and taking out the fluff, and that's why I think like that can make it definitely seem a certain way too. If that's the only way you're consuming that, like I would not recommend, you know what I mean? Like
I totally agree.
that's why I like podcasts or longer videos
Like this
or
one.
like this documentaries. That's so you can pop up the little subscribe thing right there.
Subscribe.
But you know, like I just think that you can go more in depth, right? This is kind of the issue is, I guess, with social media and this specific, you know, genre of content, if you will. You know, because you can only fit so much in a short period of time, and people's attention spans are so short on there. It's like you have to, but then it's, you know,
It's not the full picture.
Yeah, it's not the full
You
picture.
know, it's missing context. You know, I think you were talking, especially like, tell the people like something like in the health world, especially like you feel like certain things lack context.
Yeah, like I've made, for you people listening, you won't know, but I edit videos for a health podcast, right? And I'm kind of confronted with this on a regular basis, where it's like the guest has shared a great statistic, and this is a great piece of information, and I know from my Instagram, TikTok brain that if I cut out where they cite it from, and they just say a study says blah 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 blah, then I can fit more info in there and it'll technically be a better clip. But I was like, I avoid doing that because I know from a consumer perspective, it's like people are then going to go, well, they're just making this up. And they're just like, where did they get that? And I'm like, you need the context of how was the study done? Was it a double-blind placebo, like controlled study, or how did they do it, right? And that kind of stuff is really important. But I think it can get overlooked if it's like, what are you here for? Is it to like share this good quality information, or is it to get 800,000 views? Because for me, I'd rather like, I think it's more important to share the full picture as much as you can with context, reach fewer people, but impact them more wholly and like in a better way, even if they don't know it, than reaching more and having it be like, oh, now there's arguments in the comments and people that, you know what I mean? It's definitely something to like, I'm curious what will happen moving forward as more and more and more and more of this stuff is happening, because it's like short form content is so popular right now, right? But it's just something to think about, especially if you're making stuff, right? Yeah.
Totally. Switching gears, one criticism that I've often heard about self-help is that it's for the privileged.
What do you think about that?
In the sense that, like, to be completely honest, like living in North America, being where we are right now, we're not worried about a roof over our heads, running water, food, all these different things, you know? Like, we have the privilege to work on ourselves because we're not just trying to survive.
I agree. Yeah.
And oftentimes that's a roadblock for a lot of people. Before I share my thoughts on that, what do you think?
Well, I think I agree with that. And I do think that is definitely true. And I acknowledge that, like we've said it before, right? Like, we're definitely basing everything we're saying off of our own experience and our current living environment and conditions, right? But I think to the extent that we're talking about, like, this whole industry thing is definitely probably a pretty privileged thing. But, you know, you don't need all of that to try to improve your life. Like, you are ultimately in control of your mind, right? But I haven't been in a situation, you know, where I've had a terrible living situation or whatever, and been trying to find food and water and like, I mean, there's the higher, like, whatever, what's this? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's like, that's a real thing. Like, if you don't have food, you're not thinking about meditating, right? Yeah, totally. Like, you need to eat. So, I do think then that it really is probably inherently a privileged thing, because you need to have certain boxes checked to be able to think about other things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is it's real. Like, you can't think about your mindset and like becoming the best version of you if you don't have food, you know, if you can't have a roof over your head. And I know that's often a roadblock for many people, but the reality is like, if you're listening to this podcast, right? If we're in a position where we can listen to a podcast on our phone or on our computer, you're in the top percentile of people who have ever lived in terms of wealth, right? You're the top 0. something out of all the people who've ever existed in humanity, right? Plenty of people have not had access to this. And what I would say is, like, don't let that stop you. You know, just because it's inaccessible to other people, you know, shouldn't, like, it's okay. How do I say this in a way where I don't get canceled? I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to cut this out.
Yeah.
You know, but I would say, don't let it stop you. You know, just because, you know, someone else might not have access to these things does not mean that you can't do the work to help better yourself, to hopefully lift others up.
Yeah, because it is a communal thing. But I think part of that is acknowledging that that privileged state and the fact that you're able to do it, right?
Yeah, it's a hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I see it. But it is it's been great, like, self-help in my life and everything. We're doing this because of it, and thank you all for listening. It's nice to talk in person.
Of course. So good to talk in person. Make sure you all stay tuned for the season finale. We're going to have 2 very special guests, and we're going to be doing this in person. Yeah. It's going to be awesome, but we have one more episode before this.
Yeah, we've got next week, and then the week after is going to be the season finale, and then we'll see you for season 4.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's already out by then, you can check out the season finale over here.
Yeah, right there.
It's gonna be a dope. It's gonna be a dope discussion. I can already see it coming up. Yeah. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, y'all. We'll catch y'all later.
See ya.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to support the show, make sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Visit us on Instagram and TikTok at Let's Talk About Life Pod, and for more information, head on over to harrisonkingofficial.com/podcast. Now it's time for you to get out there and have a deep, meaningful conversation in your own life.